Today we're going to move on to conditions of rectangles, rhombi, and squares. This is the second part of our lesson from Module 7, Section 5. And before we really get started, let me explain again that you should have a list of rules. So you should have, 4 lists of rules. Parallelogram rules or properties, right? Rectangle rules or properties. Rhombus rules or properties. And square rules or properties. And so you really need those 4 lists. And those 4 lists will be every bit as useful, if not even more useful, than what you're going to see in this video today. And so we already have the rules of a rectangle. One of the rules of a rectangle is that it has 4 right angles. And so now we're going reverse. If it's a parallelogram, so you know it's a parallelogram, you know opposite sides are parallel. But you don't know for sure whether or not it's a rectangle. And you see one right angle, then you know the whole thing is a rectangle. All right. And so these all end with, then it is a rectangle. Right. And so the other one is, the other rule of a rectangle was diagonals are congruent. So now we know the reverse is true. If we see a shape and we're wondering if that shape is that was terrible drawing. Let me try that again. All right. If we see a shape and we're wondering if that shape is a rectangle, then are the diagonals the congruent? All right. And so if the diagonals are congruent, then we know that it is for sure a rectangle. Right. And so we're going to have to be able to identify based on some rule what the shape is. Rhombus. All right, same thing. If the diagonals are perpendicular, so this is one of the rules, all right, of a rhombus. Now we're saying that if we know the diagonals are perpendicular, all right, then we know for sure it is a rhombus. All right, or if we know the diagonals bisect a pair of opposite angles, or if we know 2 consecutive sides are congruent, right, then we know it is a rhombus. And so let's draw a quick example. So we have this shape up here, right? We don't know if it's a rhombus or not, but they told us it's a parallelogram. And if they draw the diagonals in, they tell me that this one's 90 degrees. And I know for sure it is a rhombus because diagonals are perpendicular. Or if we have the shape, we're not sure if it's a rhombus or not, but we see one diagonal and it splits one of the corners into 2 equal angles. Then if it bisects a pair, well, I should say it splits both opposite angles into 2 equal angles, then we know it is a rhombus. Or if we have this shape and we know it's a parallelogram, but we're not sure if it's a rhombus, so we know consecutive sides are congruent. We think of parallelogram rule, opposite sides are congruent. So if those 2 are congruent, then all 4 are congruent. And so it would be a rhombus. Okay. Square sounds like it's the easiest, but it actually is probably the hardest to prove. So you have to prove it's a rectangle, and they won't just say it's a rectangle. So you're going to have to know, like, if diagonals are congruent, that means it's a rectangle. And you're going to have to prove it's a rhombus. So they're not going to just say it's a rhombus. You're going to have to prove it's a rhombus. And if it is both things, then you know it's a square. So it's kind of the hardest when you're going to prove here because you have to know both rules before you can say it's a square. All right, let's look at some examples. 4 congruent sides. So 4 congruent sides. That part means 4 congruent sides. What is that a rule of? 4 congruent sides. What shape is the base rule is 4 congruent sides? That means it is a rhombus. Correct. 4 right angles. 4 right angles. What shape means it has 4 right angles? The base rule of what shape is 4 right angles? You said rectangle. That is correct. So it's a rhombus and a rectangle. Therefore, it is a square. This is a parallel. Two pairs opposite sides equal. Two pairs opposite sides equal. Opposite sides congruent means it's a what? Opposite sides congruent means it's a base rule of a parallelogram. So we know for sure it's a parallelogram. 4 right angles. We just said that meant it was a rectangle, so we know it's a parallelogram, and it's a rectangle, so we can say it's a rectangle. That parallelogram with two equal non-right interior angles. Well, they're not right. If it's not right angles, then we know it's not a rectangle. So it's saying, hey, it's not a rectangle. And it has 4 congruent sides. 4 congruent sides means a rhombus. It's a rhombus and not a rectangle. So therefore, it's only a rhombus. I love this example. It's a little bit tricky. All right, let's look at the first two together first here. MB, let's mark it. MB's right here. It's congruent to BP right here. And LB is congruent to BN. So this diagonal got split into 2 equal parts. And this diagonal got split into 2 equal parts. Or you could say the diagonals were bisected. Again, go to your rules. In your list, you got parallelogram, rectangle, rhombus, and square. Where is diagonals bisected? What's that a base rule of? That's a base rule of parallelogram. So when we know this means it's a parallelogram. It didn't say it was a parallelogram. It just said it was a quadrilateral. So now I know it's a parallelogram. Now this says down here, MP is congruent to LN. MP is the whole diagonal, LN. So this is saying diagonals are congruent. So go to your list. Which list has diagonals being congruent? Is that a rhombus rule? Is that parallelogram rule? Rectangle rule? Square rule? Diagonals congruent is a rectangle rule. And so now I could say that it is a rectangle. So this one for sure, I could say it's a parallelogram and a rectangle. This is the homework. Give it a try, and good luck to you.